something that we have been questioned a lot is about timeline, because we don't have an exact date about when the GMAT Focus edition is going to be live. So one of the questions that I would like you guys to touch in is, should people take the GMAT now if they have been preparing for the past few months? Should they wait until the GMAT Focus edition? Should they keep studying or not? What would be your main thoughts into that?
Don't torture yourself. If you're ready to take the test, if you've been studying and you feel like you're in good shape, get in there. Just do it. Don't let this throw off your prep. Don't let this change anything at all. Keep in mind that we don't know exactly the timeline yet, but it looks like the old version and the new version will both coexist for a little while. So if you've been prepping for the current version, you don't really want to sit there in limbo. Who knows when it's going to get rolled out? The rumors are fall. Some of the rumors are it's going to be earlier. We don't know. If you're ready to take the test, go take the test. If you're a month or two away, keep doing what you're doing. Don't worry about it. We know that we're going to have the existing version until early 2024. So you've got lots of time. If you're ready to take the test, take the test. Do not let this throw you off, because if you're making great progress, embrace it. Go take it. You'll be fine.
I 100% agree. I'm actually teaching a class right now where our last class session is in 3 days. So my students are like, wait, what does this mean? And what I've been telling them is exactly what Charles just said. Move forward with your plans. This exam is going to be around long enough for you to get the score that you need to apply this fall. It's not a problem. This is essentially a bonus, because if you don't get the score that you want on the old version, then by the time the new version launches, you've got an option of something else to try. And I would be surprised, anything could happen, but I would be surprised if the new exam is live before the second half of this year, because they're going to need to release prep materials. We know the OG is possibly almost here, except now it's been pulled, so who knows exactly when that's going to get published. But the bigger thing is they need to release their own practice tests. And they need to give people at least a couple of months to study from the materials before they go take the real test. So we've got a little bit of time before this new test launches.
They're also going to need time to educate the admissions officers themselves about this new test, right? Because the admissions officers are the ultimate consumers of this information. Well, maybe the rankings. One could argue that U.S. News is the ultimate consumer of this information. But, the admissions officers themselves are going to have to be educated about what does this new test mean. So I agree with you guys. If you're watching this and you're already studying for the GMAT, don't stop what you're doing, especially if you're aiming for round 1 of this year. I don't know, the GMAT prep. I know that right now that's the big thing on everyone's mind. But once you're done with the GMAT, there's still a whole lot of other stuff you got to do to apply. And so the sooner you get that GMAT out of the way, especially if you're aiming for round 1, right? We're recording this right now in March. Round 1 deadlines are usually in September. Get it out of the way instead of being in limbo on the test. And then what if they do release the new test and you're scrambling to do that and write your essays and get your recommendations all at the same time? It's going to be a big mess. So keep doing what you're doing. And just, power through, because there's more that awaits you after you're done with the GMAT.
Yeah, and I echo all of that. Like we were saying, after the GMAT, you are yet to prepare all your applications, to work on your essays, to do some networking with schools. So the sooner you can get the GMAT out of your way, the better. I remember the sensation of doing that, and it felt great. And even Pooja asked that question here in the chat that you guys touched, how adcons consider these changes. And I can say, being currently at Darden, Pooja, that people still don't know how to consider those changes, because we still do not really know how the new scale is going to be, if there is going to be a new scale of scoring. So we are all in the limbo right now, and we will have to wait to see what those changes will cause in terms of admissions, of average scoring, and everything. So, any of you guys want to add something?
Yeah, I'd love to throw in that it's probably, what we've seen over the years with the GRE and the EA is that when there's a different score on a different scale, this gives you more options as a test taker. That's good. But I would also argue that if there is a new scale with the new GMAT Focus edition, it's going to be a perfectly good thing for you as a test taker, because it's going to take a while for admissions committees to figure out how to interpret it, as Maria said. Now, where that's a good thing is that over the years, we've kind of built up the GMAT to be this whole thing, and everyone has really kind of strong anchor points to what scores mean. Okay, 700 was this really key threshold for decades. Then the rankings came in, and we're looking at, Kellogg's average is a 737, so I have to get a 740 plus. We have these really, really strong anchor points, and they are huge psychologically for admissions officers, for test takers, for everybody. And as soon as there's a different scale with different numbers on it, now all of a sudden that goes away. So one of the things we've seen over the years, part of why GRE's grad market share from GMAT is it's a different score scale. And I think it's given admissions committees the freedom to say, hey, we've got a candidate here, and maybe they scored above a 160 on both sections of the GRE, probably good enough. Now let's focus on other parts of their application. You see the same sort of effect with the EA that's on a scale of 130 to 170. Now, we don't know if they're going to change the score scale here, but if they do, I think as admissions officers are figuring it out, or even if it is the same score scale, as they're figuring it out, I think it's going to make it a lot easier for admissions officers to kind of drop the obsession with 740s and 750s and 700s, look at you more holistically. So this is part of why I'm really bullish on this for applicants and test takers, is if they do remove the score scale, or as admissions committees are figuring it out, yeah, they're going to go, I think that's okay. Focus on everything else about your application. So that should reduce your stress levels, hopefully.
Agreed that we'll have a few years leeway if they change the score scale. We'll have a few years of niceness, I'll call it, in terms of how this is used in admissions. The other thing I'll just mention, because I'm seeing a lot of stress going on in the comments, if you haven't started studying yet, or you're early enough in your studies that you're wondering whether later this year you should take the old exam or the new exam, and what should you do now, there's enough intelligence, although we don't know everything yet about the new exam, there's enough for you to start studying the things that are on both exams. The two quant question types, it looks like, are going to remain the same. It looks like we're not going to have geometry, and there may be some other content areas that are also removed, but you're going to have statistics, you're going to have story problems, you're going to have fractions and decimals and percents and ratios. There's some core content that we know is going to stay. So you can start to study that stuff, start to study critical reasoning and reading comp on the verbal section. And then you can see in another few weeks or a month, or however long it takes them to release more official information, what's actually going to be fully on the test.
I was just going to say, I think that you guys, everyone's intuition about the difference in the scoring scale is probably going to be right, because I do think that there's been decades now of us immediately, you look at a GMAT score and you're like, what, 680? And that immediately comes with all this psychological baggage. And I think one of the reasons the GRE has been able to take so much market share is because it doesn't, you sort of look at it and you're like, okay, 162, like, is that, I guess that's kind of good. You don't have quite that intuition for it. And in fact, the data actually proves that taking the GRE is better. I've got a blog post about how if you look at the average GMAT scores at the top schools report, and then you look at the average GRE scores, let's say for Stanford, your GMAT score has to be in the top sort of 3% of test takers, 97th percentile. But for the GRE, it's a lot more forgiving. It's like in the upper 80%. So let's say you have to be in the top 15% of GRE test takers. So even the data, like the schools reporting themselves, they don't highlight this, but it is easier, quote unquote. And then this is my completely unscientific take on this, but I think the fact that the GMAT score, it goes up by increments of 10, you look at something like a 740 versus a 770 and you think, wow, it's 30 points difference. It's such a huge difference. But really, it's it's pretty much like a 1 percentile difference. It's essentially negligible. But in terms of the GRE, you go from 161 to 162 to 163. Those are much bigger jumps in terms of the percentiles. So I also think that if anyone from GMAC is listening and would like to hire me to consult to them, everyone on this panel is available for hiring. But I do think that they should have it on a lower scale, so that those bump ups and increments don't seem so like, wow, because it really isn't. Like after, 760 to 800, it's all 99th percentile. So it sounds like a big difference, but you're 99.2 percentile versus 99.8 percentile. Like it's not quite as big of a difference as the raw score difference makes it seem.